Manish, you're a get the out of here.
Oh!
Okay, well, are you all out?
You.
We're all out.
Done, Manish.
All right, Shark.
See
Thank you
ya.
very much.
Won't want to be ya.
Okay, we're going to try to be a little more civil than that. We're turning the tables on the sharks, and we are going to have our CEOs, some of OurCrowd's best portfolio companies, come up to the stage and grill the sharks. In this current market environment, I think it'll be particularly interesting to see how the VCs react to what is on the minds of our entrepreneurs. So let's get going by inviting our 3 CEOs. Starting with Dr. Gilly Regev, CEO of SaNOtize. Dr. Regev is a biotech executive experienced in launching pharmaceutical enterprises and one of Canada's foremost scientific entrepreneurs and innovators. She co-founded SaNOtize in 2017 and has served as CEO since inception. SaNOtize has developed a virus-killing FDA-approved product developed that is proven 99% effective. She was named one of the top 25 women leaders in biotech by the Healthcare Technology Report and received YWCA Women of Distinction Awards as the Entrepreneur and Innovator of the Year in 2022. Round of applause. Moving on to Rafi Levi is the founder and CEO of DOTS, Data of the Soil, whose real-time nitrate monitoring product will combat prevailing fertilizer overdose, prevent waste, and protect the environment. Rafi spent nearly 20 years in leadership roles in the Israel Navy, covering engineering management and command positions. Let's hear it for Rafi. And our last CEO, Schreiber from Freightos. Freightos is the internet marketplace for the trillion-dollar international freight market. Zvi is a serial entrepreneur, executive, and an author, has founded multiple businesses over the course of his career, and has led several of his companies to very successful exits. Freightos is digitizing one of the world's largest industries, international shipping and air cargo, and was amongst OurCrowd's very first investments 10 years ago. Just 3 weeks ago, Freightos completed its listing on NASDAQ, and its ticker is CRGO. Round of applause for Tzvi. Now, before we introduce our VCs, let's call on what must be the coolest and most popular tool that everyone is talking about, OpenAI's ChatGPT. And let's use that to help us figure out why VCs have a shark of a reputation. Why do VCs have a reputation of being sharks? VCs have a reputation of being sharks because they are often perceived as aggressive and ruthless in their pursuit of profits and returns for their investors. This can include taking tough negotiating positions with startups, pushing for rapid growth at the expense of other considerations, and being willing to cut ties with underperforming companies. The term shark implies a cunning and predatory approach to business, which some people associate with the behavior of VCs. However, not all VCs fit this stereotype, and the reputation of the industry as a whole has become more nuanced in recent years. And with that, let us introduce our 4 VCs. First up is Christina Karapataki at Breakthrough Energy Ventures. Welcome, Christina. BEV invests in companies that leverage innovative technologies to help address climate change and is backed by many of the world's top business leaders. Christina focuses on decarbonization solutions for the electricity, transportation, and manufacturing sectors. She's interested in finding tech that can leverage expertise from established industries to solve climate problems. Now calling Jared Heyman, Managing Partner at Rebel Fund. Round of applause. Rebel is a seed stage venture fund that invests exclusively in Y Combinator startups with a portfolio now approaching $10 billion in enterprise value and over 80 unicorns. Rebel aims to invest in the very best of tens of thousands of tech startups that apply each year to Y Combinator. When he's not nerding out on new tech, you'll find him kiteboarding or hanging out with his 7-pound Pomeranian. And joining us next is Jonathan Klar, a managing director at Susquehanna Growth Equity. Let's hear it for Jonathan. SG is focusing on investments in the software security, e-commerce, and payment sectors. SG's active portfolio consists of over 60 companies that have generated last year a combined revenue of $4.6 billion and over $350 million in EBITDA. And before joining SGE, Jonathan spent 8 years at BRM Capital, where he led investments in software and internet companies. And finally, I'm pleased to introduce Judah Taub, co-founder and managing partner at Hetz Ventures. Hetz is a leading Israeli seed stage venture capital firm with 300 million of AUM. And before founding Hetz, Judah was the head of data at Lansdowne Partners, a 20 billion London-based hedge fund, as well as advising multiple young startups. In his service in the Israel Defense Forces, Judah served as an officer in a classified intel unit where he engineered a large-scale project to win the IDF 2014 Creativity Award, and was later named one of Israel's Forbes 30 Under 30. Let's hear a round of applause for all of our participants, CEOs, and sharks. Okay, and we're going to start with Dr. Gilly Regev, who's going to ask the first question, and I believe she's going to direct it at Christina and Jonathan.
What's the most common misunderstanding that entrepreneurs, founders have about VCs?
Thank you, Gilly. I think the most common misunderstanding is why do we say no to deals? Right? We tend to invest in about 1 to 2% of all the deals that come through our inbox. Right? So I do think there is a misunderstanding of we don't pay enough attention, or we don't spend enough time looking at the company, or we haven't understood the business. And I think VCs saying no doesn't mean that the company is not investable or is not a good endeavor. There are multiple other reasons why we might be forced to say no, like it might not fit the thesis of the fund. Like at Breakthrough Energy, where I work, we have a very high target for greenhouse gas emissions. So if that particular product or company doesn't meet the emission threshold, we can invest, even though many of those companies are excellent companies and very profitable endeavors. And another reason is, have we already allocated a lot of our funds in that particular sector, which means we can't go over and we can't over-allocate in a particular space. And honestly, sometimes we get it wrong. Right? But I think there's a lot of maybe some misunderstanding or communication of why was there a no on the decision, and how do you better communicate that?
Thank you very much, Christina, and over to Jonathan.
So I think the biggest misconception that entrepreneurs have is that the only way to build a business is through venture capital. So I think there are other ways of funding a business, customers funding a business. There are government funds to fund a business. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs, don't believe that you can build a business that way. We have a business that last year did $350 million in ARR, and that's a business that didn't take any money from venture capital. We have other businesses that have got to $50 and $60 million of ARR. And I think focusing on customers and understanding that venture capital is a tool with benefits and also downsides, and that it's not something that you need to do every year. It's not something you need to get addicted to. It's one of the many tools that entrepreneurs have, but it's not the only one.
All right, thank you very much for that. And we're moving on to Rafi, who's going to ask the next question, and it's going to be directed at Jared and at Judah.
Hi. In the recent period, we find that VCs, which are intended for pre-seed and sometimes seed, put a lot of weight onto sales. And That's kind of a contradiction in terms because their agenda is take a technology to market and not generate revenues. How do you see this shift? And mostly, how would you recommend or propose for CEOs to face this shift coming to VCs?
If you sit in the seat of a VC, for every startup that you look at, you're essentially assessing the risk. And having a proven sales track record is one way to see that the startup is somewhat de-risked. Because if there's sales that are growing quickly, it's a good sign of early product market fit. But it's not the only thing VCs look at least not good VCs. So for us, for example, we look at generally 4 categories of traits when we look at a company. We look at the traction, which is sales is one way of measuring that. We look at the team, the product, the market. We also look at maybe the timing and defensibility. And we're always thinking, how risky are each of these traits for this company? And while sales is one way of showing the VCs that your startup is less risky, there's other things as well. Team is fantastic. And as a pre-seed investor, we look very heavily at the team. As an extreme example, if Elon Musk were to walk into a VC's office asking for money, no one would say to Elon, come back when you have $1 million in ARR. So I think the point that my advice would be to emphasize other aspects that can de-risk your startup, your team, your product, how great your product is, if it's the best thing since sliced bread or ChatGPT, that will also sway VCs.
All right.
Hey, hi. So I'm not 100% sure I agree with this shift. I know some VCs move up market, others move down market. Others try and find creative ways of saying no, and maybe sort of hide behind answers around sales. But if I take Hetz as an example, we meet 1,400 startups a year, and we invest somewhere between 4 and 8 of them. It's competitive. It's really competitive, especially in today's market. And actually, the last few cohorts of startups that we've come across are probably the best cohorts that we've ever seen. So that doesn't mean you need to have sales. We lead 90% of our deals, and in the vast majority of those cases, the entrepreneurs didn't have any sales at all. We do pre-seed. When we do that, they never have any sales. So my recommendation would be to try and take a step back and think why you're being told this. Is it really because you haven't got any sales? Or is there maybe something else that you could do that the VCs that are saying this aren't actually telling you?
All right. Thank you very much, Judah, for that input. We're moving over to Tzvi to ask his first question to be directed at Christina and Jonathan.
All right, Christina and Jonathan. I've had an experience as an entrepreneur where I got rejected by all the VCs I approached, which was pretty much all of them. And then there was an article in TechCrunch or whatever saying that this field is hot. And then days later, the same VCs were fighting for space in the round and getting really angry that I said the round was full and So my question is, are VCs too often following trends instead of creating them?
Good one.
So I do think that's a really good question. I do think the press releases that talk about things like customers or the section or the sector or the traction is what we just heard earlier. It's so competitive that any company that puts out we closed a customer agreement in this hot sector, or we've developed new IP in this hot sector, immediately cuts at the top of the radar. But for early stage VCs, for seed companies, I do think there are trend centers in the industry. I think venture capital as an industry is a trendsetter because you're trying to do investments at a point where no one else would fund them, right? You're taking the highest technical risk, you're taking the earliest product development, and there's data out there, if you look at when do the public markets start paying attention to those companies, those technologies, usually it's 2, 3, 4 quarters after the early stage, seed stage, Series A VCs have invested in those sectors. So I do think there's a large fraction of the venture capital money that are creating trends and creating interest in sectors that would not be funded any other way. Now, having said that, capital follows capital, right? You see many companies where you're always your seed and your Series A rounds, and maybe your Series B are the hardest one to raise. But there's a critical mass where if you have enough investors around the table and you're going for your follow-on round, it becomes easier and easier to raise. You've built more credibility, you have more people around the table. So with that capital follows capital rationale, there is a lot of followers that tend to join those rounds as the company matures. But I think that's natural, because that maturity of the company takes 3, 4, 5 years to get to that point.
All right, thank you. Over to you, Jonathan.
So I disagree a little. I think when you're trying to raise money, you need to think about yourself as a salesperson. So you are selling your business, the opportunity, to the different people in the venture capital market. And just like you wouldn't go and sell your product without thinking about marketing, I think that you need to create buzz, and you need to think about who the customer is, that customer, that VC. What do they want to do? What's going to be positive for them? What's going to be negative for them? Most people don't want to be alone. Most people don't want to jump out from the crowd. People want to feel that, that they have support. And I think most venture professionals are reading, they're talking to other people in the industry, and that's what's pushing them in certain directions. And as an entrepreneur, it's your responsibility to make sure that that article appears in TechCrunch exactly a month before you want to raise money, so that you don't need to call people and they're calling you. And that's your job as an entrepreneur. You need to make the trends. I think if you think of VCs as sitting in a quiet room, thinking great thoughts about the future of technology, you're probably going to be a little disappointed.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think definitely Chat GPT is creating a lot of buzz and becoming a hotbed for people investing in those AI companies. So we look forward to seeing how that will develop over the coming months and years. We're moving back to Gilly for her second question, which will be directed at Jared and Judah.
What non-obvious skill set or trait will supercharge a startup's executive toolkit, like having a female CEO?
My answer would be the same for a female or male CEO. I'll borrow my answer from Paul Graham, who's the founder of Y Combinator, and we invest in Y Combinator startups. He said the single most important trait in his mind for a founder is what he called relentless resourcefulness. And I love those two words because I think it really captures it well. It's an ability to be relentless in your pursuit of success, but also being resourceful and crafty how you get around different obstacles. When I meet with a founder and I get this distinct feeling that I would not want to be standing between him or her and their goal, that's the feeling I want before I invest. Like, I would not want to get in this person's way. So founders that can go or over or around whatever obstacle comes their way, I think that's a great trait.
Okay, Judah, take it away.
So there's obviously a lot of traits that are really important, but one that I think is not given enough emphasis, and I'll explain it, is being able to avoid local maximums. Good entrepreneurs are able to analyze their environment every day, look at the different choices ahead of them, say left and right, and accurately assess, if I go left, that's where my company will get to. If I go right, this is where it will get to, and they'll make the right choice. But as every engineer will be able to tell you, if you make 100 good decisions like that, you will probably get to a good outcome, but you won't get to a great outcome. Making good decisions, but that are only very short-term, short-sighted ones, every single time, left or right, will give you a good company, a good founder, but not a great one. It's the great ones that can see these local maximums, these small hills and wins, and see from a distance, no, we're not going down that path. We're going down a completely different path, and that's what leads to true greatness.
All right, thank you for that.
If I can add something to
Absolutely.
that. To make it more interactive. I think at the end of the day, a CEO needs to be a great salesperson. You're selling to your customers, of course, but you're selling to your vision to your key employees, like the best talent that you can attract. You're selling your company to the most suitable investors that you can have around the table. You're selling it to the company to the advisors that you're going to get, to the suppliers. When you say, I'm going to build one of these units, but don't worry, I'm going to build 10,000 of those in 3 years from now, so work with me. So I think that the being a great salesperson all around is a key skill set.
Thanks, Christina. And if you ask me, I think that way before sales, entrepreneurs need to be able to get up after they fall down, and that's a pretty important trait. Moving on to our second question from Rafi.
Okay, again, I'm going back to the investment side so you can see where my company stands. When you look at the option of safe or seed or any investment round, in this prevailing market conditions, how do you see or how would you prefer, or how do you recommend for us to look? Should we look for a round with very closed boundary conditions, cap or value, etc., or should we go for a safe, leaving some unknowns for the later period when the market clears and starting off with some safe boundary conditions which are not the final round boundary conditions?
Great, so over to you, Christina, right?
Yes. So I think even if you're going for a safe, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get boundary conditions or terms around your instrument. You might still get a capped safe. You might still get board seat requests. You might still get information rights. So it may not look as clean as you would want it to look at. And at least in the recent market conditions, from the middle of 2022 to now, we're seeing a lot less uncapped safes and in cleaner terms. So I think it depends on how much money you're raising, how long you need to get to a milestone, but getting someone to price your company and actually have a market validation, I think is an important marker. So if you're raising a significant amount of capital, you want to have 18 months of runway, you want to prove traction, I think it's important to have those boundary conditions set up front and be able to know what your valuation is, know how you're working with the existing investors, especially if you want to build a really strong syndicate. Now, if you're doing it as something that's a bridge to a proper round, maybe you can get a cap safe, but I think I'm putting my hat on with the current market conditions. If I was answering this question in early 2022, late of 2021, I would say you have a lot lower risk of raising your next round of funding, so you can deal with this ambiguity of a safe without defined conditions around it.
Thanks, Jonathan. Can we get your insight?
Yes, with pleasure. So I'm very against safes. I think safes came about when the market swung over the past kind of 5 to 10 years in favor of entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs had kind of the power, and so then people didn't want to have this hard and difficult conversation about exactly what is the business worth today. And so what they did was, like we've seen in many negotiations, they punted the topic down the road and they said, hey, we'll work that out when we come to it. Essentially, someone else can set the value. And I think there's lots of room within the safe all of a sudden for people not to be aligned. So when you come to do the next round, are you trying to optimize for valuation or are you trying to optimize for the most value-add partner? And I think when you do a safe, you're kind of just pushing it down the road. To me, it always looked from the side like two people are getting married, but they're not actually willing to talk about where they're going to live. After they get married, it might work out. But I think if you can't talk, if you're about to go into a relationship, but you can't talk about the big topics because that's awkward or because you're embarrassed to give someone the truth about what's you can't take my truth. But if you're embarrassed to talk about valuation, down the road as an investor, you're going to be willing to tell the hard truths to the entrepreneur that you're with. So I think a lot of the safes create this relationship where what's happened maybe over the past 5 years, where we don't tell the entrepreneurs what we see as the reality. We sit there quietly because we're worried about our reputations, and I think that makes us not good investors. I think entrepreneurs should want to hear our honest opinions about the valuation of their company, but also about other things.
I'm going to play devil's advocate for a second because I have a different perspective on safes. And as many of you guys know, Y Combinator invented the safe. So the vast majority of our investments are on safes. I've raised money as a founder on safes. And I think you're leaving out the most important aspect of the SAFE, is its simplicity. So SAFE stands for Secure Agreement for Future Equity, or Simple Agreement for Future Equity, excuse me.
Simple.
Thank you. And that simplicity is really, really important. I raised money for previous companies on convertible notes, which involved a lot more negotiation with investors and a lot more lawyers, and it creates a lot of friction in the investing process. And I think what SAFEs have accomplished, they've reduced a lot of that friction. A SAFE is a very simple document. It's 2 or 3 pages long. It's written in plain English. And I think they're here to stay because of the simplicity they bring to seed raises.
All right. Thank you for that. You know, by the way, I've seen some safes that run a little longer than 2 or 3 pages, but whatever. We'll leave it at that. Zvi, over to your second question.
Okay.
Directed, I think, at Jared and Judah.
Jared and Judah. And I'm going to ask this question in 2 parts. The first part is, we've already mentioned ChatGPT several times in this panel, so AI is developing at a very rapid pace, and if you project forward, it's going to develop a lot more. So how are you updating your investment thesis to take into account the current and the future capabilities of AI?
I'm going to take this because this is just like a underhanded softball question for me, because at Rebel, we developed a pretty sophisticated machine learning algorithm that we use in our investing decisions, and we've been using it since 2019. We collect hundreds of thousands of data points to train the algorithm and to assess startups in each new Y Combinator batch. And I don't so much view AI as ever replacing VCs, at least not until founders would rather work with an AI than a VC, which will hopefully never come. But I do think AI is an important tool that can aid venture investors to making good decisions. And there could be a time, not so much that AI has replaced the venture investors, but rather that VCs using AI replace those that don't, because it's just such a powerful tool. So that's how I see the future.
Yeah, at the heart of your question, I think there is a base where you're saying, will AI ultimately replace, or is it an additive assistant in some shape or form? We are very much similar to what Jared said of the opinion that AI is going to hugely help what we're doing. We're investing behind it in a very heavy way. I think if I'm trying to think about a comparative, I would say maybe similar to sort of the Industrial Revolution, when people were worried about machines. Obviously, it created some pain, specifically for corporations and different types of methods that didn't adapt. But I don't think there's any farmer today that wants to use a shovel rather than a tractor. So I think VCs are very similar in that sense. And at Hetz, we are probably the techiest Israeli VC out there with our entire investment team, ex-engineers. We use a ton of software to help us what we do. I'm happy to just give one quick example, just to bring it home. But we made this public. So a couple of weeks ago, we released a product as a VC. We released an open source piece of software to the open source community so that anybody who wants to track a piece of open source and know how many of the stars are real versus fake, contributors, forks, etc. This may be sort of Chinese to everybody here who can't speak Chinese, but to the open source community, this is huge for them. And this is one of maybe a couple of dozen pieces of software that we're using internally. So the move of ChatGPT AI for us is a massive positive.
The second part of your question?
Well, I think you answered the aspect of how it affects your job. I don't agree with what you said, but that's fine. But how does it affect your companies? In other words, are there companies which you would invest in who are going to become obsolete because of AI, or who would not be feasible without AI, but are actually feasible? So does your investment thesis change in terms of how AI impacts the portfolio companies?
I think companies, there are, of course, AI companies that they build an AI-related product, but there's also many, many more companies that just incorporate AI into their processes and how they do business. And I think in the future, for a company to incorporate AI will be as important in the future as having a website is today. It's like you don't have to be a web company to benefit from having a web presence. And I think AI is the same way. It's going to permeate into every company, both tech companies and traditional companies, and it's going to boost productivity quite a bit in the economy, I think, as a result.
Yeah. So let me give an example, because We've been trying to invest in generative AI since 2018. Our first investment was early 2019. And I think your previous question was, do VCs just follow the trends too much? We've been waiting for generative AI startups for the last few years. And now the opposite. ChatGPT comes out, so here comes all the startups. So I would say there's the same question to all the founders out there as well. But just to give an example, so I think there's going to be a whole wave of disruption and successful startups in the generative AI space. But it's important to try and differentiate between the ones that are providing incremental, small sort of maybe baby steps or even nice steps benefits. And then the question is, doesn't ChatGPT sort of 6 or 7 just knock them out of the park? Or is this an infrastructure play? Are they bringing something completely new to the table? And if a ChatGPT 10 comes out, that actually benefits the startup. And we're seeing this not just in ChatGPT, take machine vision or machine learning, where people are putting things on cameras and people are using things in a whole variety of different ways. Go to a machine vision startup and ask them, are they afraid of a new software, a successful machine vision startup, a new type of machine vision to be released by Facebook or Google? And they'll say, no, we're waiting for it. That will make our product infinitely better. So that's how we will differentiate, I think, between the ones that have long-term potential versus the ones that are maybe a nice, tricky, short-term success.
Thanks, Judah. Anybody want to take a whack at this interesting question? I think we're good.
I'll maybe just add very quickly my perspective, since I see we have time. For what it's worth, I think we want to think that AI is like the steam engine. It will sort of, help us with certain tasks that we don't like all that much. To me, the evidence suggests otherwise. I mean, AI, within a decade, has become better than humans at a lot of things that we consider to be very human, playing chess or Go, recognizing faces, translating, writing essays. ChatGPT can write poetry better than 99% of humans, and the next version will be better than 100% of humans, perhaps, I don't know. So I think the risk is much bigger that AIs within a certain number of years will be better at being a VC or a CEO. I think I may have a few more years as a CEO than a VC, but not many, because we have a more varied job in a way. But I don't see any room for optimism that AIs will just become a useful tool rather than actually replace us in a wide variety of things. But that's just my perspective.
It looks like Rafi wants to say a word about this, and we have a little bit of extra time, so just like a quick minute.
I think the problem is not AI getting better. I think the problem is once we use AI, we outsource our brain, and we're getting worse. That's the problem.
One thing's for sure, this question will continue to be asked over the coming years, so we'll have plenty of more answers coming as we continue. I think we're now at Gilly again, and Gilly's going to ask her third question directed at Jared and Judah.
Well, since none of you, I assume, invested in ChatGPT, what was the biggest positive move that you've done as a VC, and how did that impact the prospects of your investments?
Actually, I think it is Jonathan's question, so we're going to move it to Jonathan. My mistake.
So it's an interesting question. What moves do we make? So we don't, as an investment philosophy, we don't make any moves. We really see ourselves as providing advice, providing opinions, and we see the role of our CEOs to take those opinions or not take them. They're the ones that are responsible for the results. And so we think with responsibility, they have to be the ones making the decisions and responsible for the decisions. We do provide lots of suggestions, and some of them have worked out well for our companies. We were very focused over the last 10 years on capital efficiency, and we repeatedly told our companies, it's not just a question of you can raise money, so you should, but it'll become the DNA of your company. If you're an efficient company, you have to build from the ground up efficiency in your sales, in your marketing, and also in your development, in everything you do. If you allow your company culture to become inefficient because we don't need to choose between whether to go to this conference or that conference, let's just go to both of them. We don't need to choose between should we develop this feature or that feature, let's just develop both of them. It's very, very hard to reverse when the market changes, which it has. It's very hard to go back and say, oh, now I want to be efficient. Everyone, let's be efficient. As people kind of see that as a step back, and it turns out it's very deep within. And the other piece of, I would say, advice that we've been pushing people is grow your market, grow your addressable market. And we've seen people do that by, they started off in small businesses, and we told them maybe look to go to enterprise. And today, for that specific company, enterprise is 50% of revenue. And then also on product. So we've had a bunch of companies add payments as a revenue stream to their products. And that, one of the companies I'm on the board has become a third of revenue. So we don't tell people what to do. We give suggestions, and sometimes they take them. And if they work out, we take credit for them. And if they don't work out, we say it was your decision. And that's
coming from the CEO seat, then those suggestions are usually suggestions you should take.
So I had a cool story, which is that we invested in this founder. This was maybe 4.5 years ago. Didn't know him from before, which is important for the story. 2 years later, he calls me up and we got quite close, like we do with most of our entrepreneurs. We're seed investors, so we really sort of get to know them and their businesses, and it's a huge win-win, both to help us do our job better and for them. And 2 years after sort of investing, one of our late conversations at night, he says to me, Jude, I just want to talk to you about something else. I'm thinking about proposing. And we went over, and here I made a suggestion, which he went ahead with. And 9 months ago, after making a phenomenal exit that returned the vast majority of our fund, I was also the best man at his wedding, which is I'm not sure something that a lot of people can say about their founders. On the company side, we do a ton of business development. We invest in Israeli companies, pre-sales, very, very early on. And I'm glad to say that to date, 60% of our startups' first international paying customers came through us. And that is a number that's only increasing. Just to give one extreme example, there was a company that we not only got them their design partner, which was the third largest global retailer, but this global retailer later on both invested in them and signed a massive contract to roll them out. And that is something we're proud to try and do in a very repetitive way throughout our startups.
All right. Thank you very much. And we are going to wrap up with Rafi's last question.
Well, I have a formal question, but I think the question I should ask is, what is your email? But on a serious note, how do you see with the market trends today the runway that you would be your sweet spot in terms of investment in a company? What would you see as a proper runway to the investment?
I think Christina is going to answer first, and then Jared. All right? Go ahead.
Excellent. Well, I think I need to give some context. I invest in climate technologies, so hardware technologies that take usually a long time to get to market, with a lot of technical hurdles that need to be resolved and engineering that needs to be going through. So that's the context of my answer, and that's the world that I live in.
So I need your email too.
Of course. I think you have it already. So in terms of what do we think about runway, especially with current market conditions, but I think this answer was consistent before, is if you can raise more, raise more. It takes a lot of time to put a full round together, a priced round together. Right? It takes a lot of time to find a lead investor and the investor that you want to have on your cap table. And it takes a lot of legal fees as well to put all those documents in place and a lot of negotiation. So if you're going to go through a price round for a climate tech, hardware, technology-driven startup, I have yet to find a founder that told me, I raised too much money, right? And I didn't like it. I have not met that founder yet. So in general, we do want to have a long runway. For us, a long runway is 18 months. 24 is even better, because things will come along. Again, hardware, climate technology. And that's the same way that we viewed the world before. Raise a strong syndicate, bring partners that can add value, bring partners that you want to have around the table. And if you're in the very fortunate position of being oversubscribed and having the opportunity to raise a little bit more than what you were planning to raise, like 9.9 times of 10, I would say take it.
Over to Jared.
I agree with Christina's sentiment that better to raise a little too much money than not quite enough, because as you know, when a startup runs out of money, it's sudden death. So better take a little extra dilution and be confident that you can survive for the long term. In terms of how we look at runway, I'll tell you as a firm how we think about it, and then my advice to founders as to how they should think about it. So as a firm, we are perfectly happy being the first money into a startup after Y Combinator itself. So a lot of startups we invest in, they've raised 500K from YC. We know they're going to need a lot more than that to achieve their seed goals, but we have confidence that if we invest in a company, other investors will also invest in them after us, and so far that's always been the case. We've invested in over 100 companies, and every single one of them so far has met their funding goals, even if we were the first money in. So we don't use existing runway as a metric we look at. We just don't look at it. My advice for you as a founder would be to raise more, not just for or as much as you can, I suppose, as long as the valuation is reasonable, not just for the reasons Christina mentioned, but also in this market, it's tougher than ever to raise Series A's and B's in subsequent rounds. So I think having that extra buffer in a high interest rate environment, a more difficult venture environment, is very important for founders. So if you think you need 18 months, raise 36. And you'll always find yourself spending money more quickly than you thought you would. And you'll always find yourself not quite hitting metrics as quickly as you thought you would. And better to err on the side of caution because, again, a $0 bank account means you're over.
Judah wants to answer as well. Quick answer.
Just something really quick. To any of the founders in the audience or listening to this, I think, and you've got 3 really successful ones here, and I think what they will tell you is there's a massive difference between raising capital when you have to and when you can. You can see they're nodding. It's just true. So if you're a founder out there, I think the main thing you want to try and think about is how quickly can you flip from having to raise money because you have to, you have a gun to your head, and you can raise money, but you don't have to. And that is where you as founders will get the terms you want, and you'll be able to get the investors you want, and you'll be able to get probably the valuation you want as well, because you don't have to. So I would optimize when you're thinking about these rounds, is how do you position your company, not these short-term steps, how do you position long-term your company so you don't have to go back to raise money, but you just will be able to at some point?
I think Jonathan wants to add something, but really quick, because Christina has a flight to catch, and it's leaving really soon.
Christina's flight. I just want to say that I think there's a cost to this perspective of raising money. Let's raise money, raise more. And the cost is paid by the entrepreneurs on exit. Go back and do your research. Look at what Zuckerberg owned at exit. Look at what Gates owned at exit. We've got an entrepreneur that sold his company for many billions of dollars, owned 40% of the company at exit. And the reason they all owned that was because they were very, very careful about not taking money, and they're very, very careful about doing business development deals and trying to find other sources of capital. So if you can see you're about to run out of money, don't just think VC. Think maybe some customers can fund your development, maybe some other people.